Hello, my name is Shelby Berger, and I will be presenting the transistor. What is a transistor? A transistor is a device that regulates current or voltage flow and acts as a switch or gate for electronic signals. So it's essentially a switch that either starts or stops a signal with either a 1 or a 0. So the 1 means it's on and the electricity is flowing, and a 0 means it's off and the electricity is not flowing. And it's involved in nearly all electronics, including cell phones, computers, low jack in your car, pacemakers, and many more things. What is it made of? It's primarily made of silicone, but sometimes made of germanium. It utilizes doping of semiconductors with phosphorus and boron. And we'll go into doping a little bit more when we watch a video that I've included, but essentially it's utilizing other semiconductors to change the flow of electrons. A feature of transistors is that transistors can turn themselves off and on extremely fast. In 2013, it was approximated that transistors could turn themselves off and on about 300 billion times a second. Currently, they are very small. They go on our microchip and our processors and our computers. And they're about 50 atoms in size, which is very, very tiny. And because of that size, they're reaching the point where further advancement is needed. We'll go into that more later. Here's the video of how a transistor works, and this guy does a really great job of explaining how transistors work and the science behind semiconductors and doping and how that's used.
In this phone, there are nearly 100 million transistors. In this computer, there's over 1 billion. The transistor is in virtually every electronic device we use. TVs, radios, Tamagotchis. But how does it work? Well, the basic principle is actually incredibly simple. It works just like this switch. So it controls the flow of electric current. It can be off, so you could call that the 0 state, or it could be on, the 1 state. And this is how all of our information is now stored and processed in zeros and ones, little bits of electric current. But unlike this switch, a transistor doesn't have any moving parts, and it also doesn't require a human controller. Furthermore, it can be switched on and off much more quickly than I can flick this switch. And finally, and most importantly, it is incredibly tiny. Well, this is all thanks to the miracle of semiconductors. Or rather, I should say the science of semiconductors. Pure silicon is a semiconductor, which means it conducts electric current better than insulators, but not as well as metals. And this is because an atom of silicon has 4 electrons in its outermost or valence shell. And this allows it to form bonds with its 4 nearest neighbors. I know that, right? What's up? So it forms a tetrahedral crystal. But since all these electrons are stuck in bonds, few ever get enough energy to escape their bonds and travel through the lattice. So having a small number of mobile charges is what makes silicon a semiconductor. Now this wouldn't be all that useful without a semiconductor's secret weapon, doping. You've probably heard of doping. It's when you inject a foreign substance in order to improve performance. Yeah, it's actually just like that, except on the atomic level. There are 2 types of doping, called N-type and P-type. To make N-type semiconductor, you take pure silicon and inject a small amount of an element with 5 valence electrons, like phosphorus. This is useful because phosphorus is similar enough to silicon that it can fit into the lattice, but it brings with it an extra electron. So this means now the semiconductor has more mobile charges, and so it conducts current better. In P-type doping, an element with only 3 valence electrons is added to the lattice, like boron. Now this creates a hole, a place where there should be an electron, but there isn't. But this still increases the conductivity of the semiconductor because electrons can move into it. Now, although it's the electrons that are moving, we like to talk about the holes moving around because there's far fewer of them. Now, since the hole is the lack of an electron, it actually acts as a positive charge. And this is why p-type semiconductor is actually called p-type. The p stands for positive. It's positive charges, these holes, which are moving and conducting the current. Now, it's a common misconception that n-type semiconductors are negatively charged and p-type semiconductors are positively charged. That's not true. They are both neutral because they have the same number of electrons and protons inside them. The n and the p actually just refer to the sign of charge that can move within them. So in n-type, it's negative electrons which can move, and in p-type, it's a positive hole that moves. But they're both neutral. A transistor is made with both n-type and p-type semiconductors. A common configuration has n on the ends with p in the middle. Just like a switch, a transistor has an electrical contact at each end, and these are called the source and the drain. But instead of a mechanical switch, there is a third electrical contact called the gate, which is insulated from the semiconductor by an oxide layer. When a transistor is made, the n and p types don't keep to themselves. Electrons actually diffuse from the n-type, where there are more of them, into the p-type to fill the holes. This creates something called the depletion layer. What's been depleted? Charges that can move. There are no more free electrons in the n-type. Why? Because they filled the holes in the p-type. Now this makes the p-type negative thanks to the added electrons. And this is important because the p-type will now repel any electrons that try to come across from the n-type. So the depletion layer actually acts as a barrier, preventing the flow of electric current through the transistor. So right now the transistor is off. It's like an open switch. It's in the zero state. To turn it on, you have to apply a small positive voltage to the gate. This attracts the electrons over and overcomes that repulsion from the depletion layer. It actually shrinks the depletion layer so that electrons can move through and form a conducting channel. So the transistor is now on. It's in the one state. This is remarkable, because just by exploiting the properties of a crystal, we've been able to create a switch that doesn't have any moving parts, that can be turned on and off very quickly, just with a voltage. And most importantly, it can be made tiny. Transistors today are only about 22 nanometers wide, which means they're only about 50 atoms across. But to keep up with Moore's law, they're going to have to keep getting smaller. Moore's law states that every 2 years, the number of transistors on a chip should double. And there is a limit. As those terminals get closer and closer together, quantum effects become important, and electrons can actually tunnel from one side to the other. So you may not be able to make a barrier high enough to stop them from flowing. Now, this will be a real problem for the future of transistors, but we'll probably only face that another 10 years down the track. So until then, transistors, the way we know them, are going to keep getting better. Once you have, let's say, 300.
Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed that video and probably explained it a lot better than I ever could. So let's get into the invention of the transistor. So it was invented on December 16th, 1947. And it was at Bell Labs. And if you're thinking Bell, that sounds familiar, like the telephone, you'd be absolutely correct. It's a part of a research branch of AT&T, if you believe it or not. And it was first demonstrated successfully on December 23rd, 1947. So this is an important distinction. It was invented on the 16th, but it was successfully working on the 23rd. And it was invented by 3 people, William Shockley, John Bardeen, and Walter Brayton. And these 3 worked as a team, each specializing in something. So William Shockley actually was working on something like this for 10 years and could not implement it in a way that it would work. So Bardeen and Brayton were brought in and as research developers and engineers, and it took them, the 3 of them, approximately 2 years to get a working transistor in the lab. When it was invented, it was the size of a palm of a hand, with a depth of 2 matchbooks stacked on top of each other. So if you think about a processor chip in a laptop, and we'll go into how many transistors those can have, think about how big it was and how small it is now. It's quite incredible, actually. why was it invented? So the transistor was invented to get rid of the need of vacuum tubes. So vacuum tubes, they're very similar to transistors, and when it's on, it would light up and it would represent a 1, and when it was off, it would be dark and it would represent a 0. They required a significant amount of tubes to do simple computations. So really simple, 2 plus 2 equals 4 would require quite a few tubes to do that, and a lot of energy as well. They just were not efficient, and they would not have been able to give us the computer that we know as today, or internet or servers or anything like that. A fun fact, according to Mike Phoebus from Technology Strategies Incorporated, is that the computer term bug was coined when moths or other insects would land on the tubes and blow them out. So these tubes were actual like little light bulbs, kind of. They're vacuum tubes, and they would glow, and little bugs would be attracted to them, and they would land on them and make them blow out, which of course then they would need to be replaced. The evolution of the transistor. I think my cursor might be too small to see on here, so I'm going to use my finger. Sorry about the technological difficulties today. Here is a picture of 1947. There's Shockley and Barton and Brayton, and there's the transistor, the original one that they created. So it's quite large and a little bit complicated. Part of the evolution that I included was Moore's Law, which was mentioned in the video. And to get into that, we're going to take a look at this little chart underneath it that says transistor density on integrated circuits doubles about every 2 years. So this law was kind of created in 1970. And as you can see, in the 1950s, the silicon transistor was pretty large. It was 1 transistor. And then we move into the 60s, so that's a decade later. There's 16 transistors in there. And they're all, you can kind of see them right there. And we go into the 1970s, and you can see there's 4,500 transistors. 1980s, 275,000 transistors. 1990s, 3.1 million, and then 2000s, 592 million. We're in 2017. I actually had a hard time finding accurate information about how many transistors are on a microprocessor right now. So I kind of had to just stop at the 2000s. But in this last picture right here, this is the approximate what a transistor would look like today. It's a lot larger than what you would see on a processor, but that transistor is similar to what they look like today versus this contraption here. And then you see a box with 3 prongs sticking out, which is a source, gate, and drain. And because of Moore's Law, currently, like he said, the transistor is 50 atoms wide. And if we get any closer, we're going to have a problem because it's going to be really hard to stop the electric current. So there's some further advancement that needs to be done in the transistor so that its evolution is definitely not over. Sorry. Why is it the best modern day invention? So, transistors have evolved to the point of allowing supercomputers to exist. Without transistors, we would not have those giant servers, solar power, wireless internet, cell phones, pacemakers, so many things. They're integrated into pretty much everything, and the future of transistor usage is very bright. transistors allow for extremely fast computing and processing, which can help with new inventions, new electronics, and new medical equipment, and more. If they can figure out how to arrange the transistor in a way that allows Moore's law to continue, then the processing power that would be capable would be incredible. For instance, we'd be able to have instantaneous translating. If you think about, like, some people are saying that they could have a hearing aid type device that would listen to someone who's talking in a different language than what you understand, and it would be able to translate instantly. So as they're speaking, you're hearing what they're saying. And that actually requires quite a bit of processing power, and to be able to fit it into a tiny device would be incredible. Without transistors, things such as internet, cell phones, and other modern necessities would not exist. So if you think about it, cell phones and wireless internet, or even just connected internet, they're actual necessities these days. You cannot do much without them. And so without these transistors, we would not have them. And so it'd be interesting to see what the world was like today. We wouldn't have a lot of the modern day technology that we have now, even certain things on the list. So another thing that transistors really have going for it is that because they allow computers to be so fast and give them so much power, we can now conduct research. We can communicate globally and instantly via the internet, for doctors to get together and discuss case studies, and researchers to get together and discuss what their findings are. So really it's kind of one of the basic building blocks of the electronic world that has really evolved to this amazing piece of electronic now. That is why I think it is the best invention for the modern era. All right. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Once again, once again, I apologize for the technical difficulties, and I would love to hear your feedback. Thank you.